Welcome to Strategy Talk, where the authors and editors discuss news and events with a splash of history. Our host today is Dan Masterson. Joining him is Jim Dunnigan, well-known military author and the Dean of Wargaming. Also, joining today's show is columnist and author retired Colonel Austin Bay.
Austin, you mentioned in an email the other day that there's a return of air defense artillery, or ADA, or some people refer to it as AA. Why did you say that?
Well, I ended up using it in a Creative Syndicate column as well. Well, it was a playoff of an earlier column and actually an earlier strategy talk where we talked about the return of artillery. Artillery never left, but the line was from World War I that artillery was the god of war because of powerful guns of World War I, entrenchments and the like. And you've seen the potency of artillery in Ukraine again. Well, air defense never went away, Dan. As a matter of fact, it just evolved into missile defense, albeit slowly because of the threat. But a little bit more background behind why I worded it that way. Since about May of 1944, the United States has way more than less, never had to deal with overwhelming enemy air power. We started out with at least air parity and quickly air superiority, and then air supremacy. Yes, the fights in Mig Alley and the like, but largely, quote-unquote, rear areas were not threatened by enemy airstrikes. The possibility of enemy missile strikes was ignored for quite a while until the early 1970s, when we began developing what was called SAM-D, Surface-to-Air Missile Developmental, which became Patriot. So it wasn't lost that there could be missile threats on U.S. installations, and primarily they were thinking about it at that time in Europe from Soviet intermediate-range ballistic missiles and the like. But what we've seen in Ukraine is that the Ukrainian air defenses have been able to deny airspace in many, surprisingly successfully, against Russian aircraft. And Russian air defenses, first of all, I ought to make this clear that Ukraine never had much of an air force in comparison to the Russians. But it's a dangerous place for Ukrainian aircraft to fly when you encounter Russian missile and anti-aircraft artillery. So you've got a strange type of air parity, at least in the classical sense, and that has to do with improved sensors to picking up larger aircraft. Note I said larger aircraft, and both in terms of radar signature, but also even forms of motion and image detection. And you've got the comparatively inexpensive, in some cases, systems to deny them the area and shoot them down if they enter it. So what's been filling the gap is drones. Now, we're going to talk about drones later today, I think, but that's why I set it down, is that there's a new emphasis on air defense in U.S. forces. Army's primarily picking it up. Navy always had plenty of air defense. At least they hoped they had enough air defense for their surface ships, and plus the aircraft for their aircraft carriers. But new and improved light medium, and even long-range anti-air, anti-missile systems are not only being developed, some are really in the almost operational state. And why? We've seen that they work. They also end up, if you deploy them correctly, buying you time for your own aircraft to ultimately suppress enemy air defenses. So that's why I said it.
Jim, one of the things is the U.S. Army has mainly focused on anti-missile defense for the last couple of decades. And you look at their the systems that they've builded, and they're going after larger things than drones. Although they do have the CRAM system, but I don't know if they've deployed it a lot. What is the strategy to take drones down?
Well, the Russians are the primary target for the use of drones. The drones are more numerous. For example, Ukraine has pledged, is basically attempting to build 1 million drones in 2024. They believe that this is a weapon that they have concentrated on, and it's far more destructive than aircraft because it comes in low. There's not much defense against it. Basically, a mass of drones can overwhelm any air defenses on the ground, and they've already managed to use them effectively against the Russians because you have the first-person view of drones where the operator can basically see, what the drone is looking at, and in direct attacks. And they've already destroyed over a third of the Black Sea fleet, and forced the Russians to withdraw what's left of the fleet to distant ports far away from Ukraine because of that threat. Those are the UUVs, the unmanned USVs, unmanned surface vessels that sank, like I say, several Russian ships and damaged many more. But the UAVs, the drones, they have been able to basically cause most of the Russian casualties. These fly low. Sure, you can shoot them down, but there are so many of them, and they basically drive the Russians nuts. They hear these drones coming, and they scramble for cover, but, there's really no escape because they have the FPV drones looking for targets, and when they find them, they report that back to the operators, and they basically direct the eyeless drones, as it were, for the target, and the Russians are regularly hunted down and killed. And they're simply terrified, whenever drones are involved because of this new strategy that the Ukrainians are using. And it works. Most of the killed and wounded are coming from drone attacks. And that's a change that nobody ever expected. They're small. As Austin points out, you can use certain anti-aircraft machine gun systems to knock them down. But there's more drones than there's bullets that are going to hit them. And so far, it's working. The Russians are working on some kind of solution, but they haven't come up with anything yet. So for the moment, the Ukrainians have the edge, and they will hang on to it as long as they can, because it is basically demoralizing the Russians. More Russians are refusing to serve in Ukraine, and they'll even take a bullet from their commander, rather than go into Ukraine and be hunted down by a bunch of machines, as they put it. If they're going to die, let's make it quick, for my officer. And of course, the Russian high command is realizing that, my God, we can't kill all of our troops, and they don't know what to do. So, one win for the Ukrainians, and they're making the most of it. Like I said, they're building 1 million of these things this year, and they're doing it internally. They're doing it in Ukraine. You don't have to depend on foreign aid. The foreign aid supplies weapons like ATACMS and Glimmers, missiles that are making attacks inside Russia. Now, the Russians made a big stink about if American weapons are used inside Russia, that will trigger some sort of international response. Well, it won't. The Russians have huge problems right now. Right now, they're basically bankrupt. We're running a piece, in a week or so about the impact of Russian finance. They can't basically access the SWIFT system, the international banking system. Now, they're trying to improvise, but basically they're broke. They're not getting the money they need. The Chinese won't cooperate anymore because they do far more trade. They do about 5% of the trade with Russia, but they do more than 50% with Europe and the United States. So they're following the money. And like I said, that's hurting the Russians. They have no allies anymore. And they're not likely to pick up any because, they're the bad guys. And who wants to side with them?
Dan, let me pick up on something real quick that Jim said. The drones are really not only attack drones causing Russian casualties and especially going after Russian vehicles, but the drones provide surveillance for Ukrainian artillery and long-range rocket fire, like HIMARS, multiple launch rocket systems. And I suspect that a lot of the casualties, you could say that they're attributable to the directly attributable to cheap drone attacks, but they also expose Russian infantry in the open and deeper targets. And the Ukrainians are operating at a NATO-like operation. I put it this way: with a NATO-like surveillance, sensor, and targeting network, so that they can bring the rockets and artillery down after the drones, even before the drones. If that kicks up a lot of dust and the like, but that's how they're killing so many Russians at a distance. I also suspect, and this is my suspicion, that some of the advances the Russians make are permitted to get them into a range of a kill zone for both small drones and then the artillery or combination missile attacks. That's a wrinkle on what's been a classic defensive operation that coax an attacker into a kill zone. And drones, the kind of intimate surveillance you can get out of them, really make that a plausible and deadly tactic. I didn't mean to interrupt Jim on that, but that's really they're doing recon jobs as well as attack jobs.
So, Jim, is there any defense for this?
Yeah, you can defend. Like I say, you can use large caliber machine guns for defense against helicopters and whatnot. There's not enough of them. There's far more drones coming in than these systems can shoot down, and they run out of ammunition before you run out of drones. And the Russians are, like I say, they're desperate for a solution, but so far they haven't got one. And they're not likely to find one because they have not got any, how should I put it, protection from this kind of attack. And without some kind of, how should I put it, solution, they're going to continue to take losses. Like I say, their soldiers, their infantry, are totally demoralized by this use of attack drones. Sure, technically you can shoot them down. If these guys turned around and went full automatic with their AK, well, the modern AK-40, the AK-12, whatever they're using now, they might hit one, but basically the drones have them terrified, and they're just running. So the Russians are finding out that, like I say, they'd rather take a bullet from their officer trying to, entice the troops to fight than to go in there and be hunted down by a bunch of machines. The Russians have authorized, this is a thing going back to World War II, officers to shoot reluctant soldiers, and they basically stop it because they realize these guys, they did the math and they say, all right, kill me now. I'm not going to get, like I say, chased around the bushes by a bunch of machines. This is quicker if I'm going to die. Russians are kind of fatalistic about that. Again, we have a piece coming out on the strategy page on that particular subject. So, the Russians are losing. Like I say, economically they're losing. The economy is on a wartime footing, but it's not getting any inputs. Like I say, the Chinese have cut off supplies. They're not getting Western, electronics they need to build the missiles. So the Russians are basically fighting a losing fight. They simply have not got the resources.
So, Jim, go ahead. Go ahead, Austin.
There are microwave drone defense systems that are in development. Some of them have been tested and deployed. There's even one that is best to describe it as if it were a wand that's portable. The thing is, the reach of these microwave anti-drone weapons is limited. But the idea is that you've got a beam microwave beam that cooks the circuitry, the memory card, the little computer inside the drone. Larger scale weapons like this, though, eat a lot of power. They take a lot of power. And that's just not something that you can get onto the battlefield easily. And as Jim is talking about Russia's problem with fielding higher-tech weapons and high-tech weapons, that's a little bit beyond their reach. I don't know that the Ukrainians are using them. I read something in one of the British papers about 6 months ago about the Ukrainians wanting anti-drone microwave type weapons for the tactical defense, short range. I do know that they've been demonstrated. A friend of mine saw a demonstration a couple of years ago and was impressed by what he saw, but it was again short range, with the drone being taken down within about 100 meters of where the defender was. And if you can do that, then that's why Jim's talking about machine guns. Do it with machine gun. So that is a defensive counter to some of these drone swarms that's being experimented with.
Yeah. Now, the Navy has their phalanx weapon system, and the Army has taken that and mounted it so they can take it into a battle area. It does not look that mobile from what I've looked at. We've got a photo of it up on the site right now, but it's a phalanx system mounted on a tractor trailer rig, basically.
And the Army had for decades a Vulcan 20-millimeter Gatling gun as anti-aircraft defense. I mean, we had those in the 1970s on M113s,
right,
units that I was in. And, that was also an Air Force version of the Gatling, of a 20-millimeter Gatling, 30-millimeter Gatling on A-10s. And Navy had adapted that for air defense, but the Army dropped air defense, quote unquote, and went to using Bradleys with the 25 millimeter and special Bradley that's at air defense, going back to Vulcan type weapons because of drones. So I just want to say that it was a Air, Army, then Navy system. The Navy knew that they needed them to knock down anti-ship missiles. But the Army had a lot of them, and finally went out of the inventory.
Yeah, now one of the things is both the Navy, the Army, the Air Force, they relied on systems that are doing some sort of tracking, radar, but that is not going to help you with a swarm of drones because you've got so many individuals pieces of equipment that are trying to come in at you and harm you. Jim, basically you said in your article that went up today that you've got to figure out how to put up a wall of lead.
And they can't do that. I mean, they can't get enough jammers. And of course, the drones can be modified to basically go. How should I put it? Vision, optical sight guidance when they get close enough to their target, which means they can't be jammed. And once they've got an onboard guidance system that is literally looking at the target, it was locked onto the target before it hit the jamming zone. There's no way to stop it except trying to shoot it down. But when you have hundreds of these things coming in, you can't shoot enough of them down. And basically, the Russians get discouraged. Like I say, the Russian infantry are totally demoralized when it comes to dealing with the drone problem because there's nothing they can do.
Yeah, you also mentioned in another article this week about I think they call it a turtle tank or something like that Russians have had to come up with.
Yeah, and this gives them some protection. Basically, you cover the entire tank with metal screens, and basically you turn the tank into something that looks like a turtle. But the FCV drones can basically come in low enough; they can literally see. They're coming in at a slow enough speed. The operator can say, "All right, I can get under there," and they can basically hit the running gear. The tread system, which is not protected by this. You got to keep the screens above the treads, otherwise it can't move. It's got to have some maneuverability. So whatever the Russians are coming up with, it's not enough. They're basically fighting robots, and the robots are not scared, and they're resourceful because the robots basically have a human, several kilometers back behind the fighting, doing the directing, and the controller doesn't care if he gets killed, or his drone gets killed. He just, boom, locks onto another one and sends that one in. So it's basically an irresistible weapon. It's an offensive weapon. You can't really use it for defense, and the Russians are the ones on the offense. And as far as the Ukrainians are concerned, if they can cripple enough of the Russian offense, which is what they're doing, the Russians are stuck. Now, Vladimir Putin is already, open the idea. Well, let's discuss a treaty, as it were, a peace deal. Unfortunately, his current terms are, well, we'll hang on to what we got, and we'll stop attacking. Ukrainians aren't going to fall for that because that got them in trouble last time. They've been lied to 3 times that way in the last 30 years by the Russians. And as the song goes, not be fooled again. So the Russians are basically between the proverbial rock and the hard place. They can pull out, but they're going to have to pull out of everything. Crimea, the 2 eastern Ukraine, Donetsk and Luhansk provinces, and any other areas in the north they've seized, because they simply can't defend themselves against the drone armada.
Which you mentioned that Ukraine has gone ahead and developed a special arm in their
yes, the drone force. The drone force. Now, this drone force does not basically control all the drones. What it does is supervise the construction, the design of better drones, manufacturing of drones. Because, like I say, Ukraine built all the drone stuff is built in Ukraine. I mean, it's simple. It doesn't require high tech technology, which they might have to get from the West. And this is literally a local project. And the drone force supervises the training of the FPV operators. It normally takes 100 hours of on the job work. The drone force comes with courses where they can get operators up to speed, after maybe a week of training. And again, they're supervising the design and the manufacturing. It's all manufactured in Ukraine. So the drone force is basically a staff operation to increase the number of drones and to increase the number of FPV, drone operators, as well as maintainers. A lot of these drones do come back, the reconnaissance and surveillance drones, and they need maintainers, people on the ground. The drone force trains them. They basically have to replace batteries, they repair, some damage and what have you, to make it more efficient. And the Ukrainians are betting big that they'll have more drones doing more damage than the Russians can respond to. The Russians are still, using tanks. But, as I explained with the turtle tank, these FPV drones can come in, under the wire, as it were, the shielding, and immobilize the tank, and then they can pick it apart, a piece at a time. Drones can come in and just blow apart part of the fence, the screens over the engine compartment, and then they can basically demolish the engine. And so, the tank may still have its main gun, 125 millimeter gun, but it can't move. And basically, the crew realizes they're sitting in a death trap, and they tend to just bail and get the hell out of there. So the Ukrainians have a weapon that only they have. I mean, the Russians are trying to build them, but it's basically an offensive weapon. And for offense, you use tanks. Even the Ukrainians use tanks. And sure enough, the Ukrainian, we sent them 31 M1 tanks, and sure enough, the Russian drones, I think, disabled or even destroyed about 6 or 7 of those so far. So the Ukrainians have to be careful. They created this monster that even the Russians can use in smaller quantities. So the drone force is basically making sure that Ukraine has far more of these drones, reconnaissance drones, attack drones, what have you, than the Russians do. And the Russians are basically, about to give up. Like I say, Putin is looking for, surrender terms. And once you start talking terms, you're losing, and he may eventually have to decide, all right, give them back all their territory, just get us out of there. Because like I say, the Russian soldiers are literally refusing to fight. The idea in Russia is that going into Ukraine is a death sentence. And like I say, if officers say, I'm going to kill you if you don't go, he says, well, why not? Kill me and I'll make it quick. Russians are kind of fatalistic in that respect. And that basically brings the Russians up short. They can't go around killing all their troops just because they won't go into Ukraine and let the Ukrainians do it. In fact, the Russians have fewer and fewer troops they can mobilize. Over 1 million Russians of military age have fled the country, even though it's now illegal. They go up into Finland and illegally cross the border, and basically the Finns put them in internment camps and say, look, guys, we'll feed you until things settle down, and then you can go home or you can ask for asylum in Western Europe. So even the Russians are abandoning Russia.
Well, it looks like we're going to chalk win up to the robots this time around.
Yeah, the robots won.
Yeah.
Dan, there are a lot of ideas swarming around about how to deal with robot swarms, even including anti-drone drones that are kamikazes to take it on. And there are also some, for instance, this is 18 months ago, I read a short article about a redesigned 30-millimeter shell for a M230 Hughes chain gun, that because the 30 millimeter is big enough to turn it into a smart shell and turn it and have a proximity fuse. And the thing is, that's like suddenly several hundred shotgun shells and the fragments that are not only exploding in the air, they're coming ultimately coming down on the ground as well. But those are some of the concepts for dealing with them, and it's the tit for tat development. The drones, no doubt, are an ace card for the Ukrainians, and as Jim says, they're great for the defense. They're good on the offense, but look how many of the Iranian drones got through in their attempt to attack Israel. Israel with a very, very sophisticated air defense system. Maybe I should have brought Israel as an example of the revival of air defense, and that's not only strategic operational area, but tactical as well.
Right. And they've been developing special systems to combat drones like that. Of course, the Hamas and its friends don't have the wherewithal to field as many drones as the Ukrainians do. So one of the things that's going to happen, and we'll wrap this up here with this statement, is that the next wave of drone warfare will be the introduction of AI, and the swarms will be able to be independent at that point, and that's going to be really scary. So we'll talk to you all. Go ahead, Jim.
No, go ahead. You're right.
Yep. So we'll talk to you all next time.
Okay, till then.
Bye.
Bye, guys.